bit of a spoiler alert. The answer to the question that we're talking about today is nobody can tell you whether or not you should talk about your experiences. And this is applicable to any type of abuse, not just CSA. You know, short of having some sort of legal reason for not being able to speak about something publicly, you might be wondering, as this person was on Twitter, Tropical Mermaid was sort of wondering whether or not they should or whether they would, or and that's a great place to be open-minded and thinking about what's the benefits, what's the cons, what should I know. And so I thought what I'll do is break down a video just with all of the things that I can think of that you could think about in coming to the decision as to whether or not you personally want to share your story. And I think that the first thing that should be spoken about is your goals. What do you want to achieve? And it's not, oh, I want to empower other victims to come forward and speak. That's extremely admirable, but at the end of the day, it's how it impacts you. So it's fabulous to be able to speak out to help other people, but if that then doesn't help you or sets you backwards, then it's not helpful, because that's not good for you. So you have to look after you first, and you have to look at what your true goal is. Will it give you personal satisfaction? Will it make you feel as though you can leave it in the past and move forward? All of these things are questions that only the victim can speak to. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about after what is your goal and what are you wanting to achieve, is some things to think about. And this is a really hard thing for me to say, because I don't want to be seen as victim blaming, and it's not in what I'm saying. It's something to think about, and that is, through speaking out publicly, how are you going to impact your relationships with family and friends? Your answer might be, I don't care what my family and my friends say, and that's great, but some people might care and they might think about it. And something that I think it's important to go in knowing, because if you know, what is the saying? Forewarned is forearmed. Anyway, something like that. And so if you go into the situation knowing that it's a potential that you may have family or friends who move away from you, who want to argue with you, who want to tell you that you're wrong, or that you shouldn't have done that, or that didn't happen, that at least you are prepared for that and it doesn't become such a shock, and that you then later on think, I shouldn't have done that, or I wish I hadn't done that. It wasn't worth doing that. All of those sorts of things. Is their behavior right in treating you differently because you've made a public disclosure? Absolutely not. Does it happen? Yes, it does. Especially where the perpetrator is a relative in the family, or a close family friend, or a respected person within the community. There are still families who would use the what are people going to think, or nobody's going to believe you. They are shocking realities, and I hope that through talking about it publicly, we can get to the point where these conversations don't happen, but they can still happen. And I thought it would be worthwhile noting, just so that you're aware and have thought about how that might make you feel and whether or not that's going to impact your decision. Another area to think about is employment, current, future. I know that there are anti-discrimination laws, but there are also job-specific requirements. And there could be a circumstance, will your public disclosure impact your current employment or your future employment? And I'll give you an example of somebody that I know who has a particular type of professional qualification. That person was a CSA victim. They had plans to use their qualification to help other CSA survivors. That person also made public disclosure with regards to their abuse. The person who committed the atrocities against that person was prosecuted and convicted and went to jail for a period of time. And that's absolutely great news, because I know that there's so many cases that don't go to court or don't even get to a courtroom because of certain circumstances regarding evidence and timeframes and all sorts of other different legal considerations. But this person it was on the public record, and there was a criminal prosecution against their perpetrator, and they were named as obviously as the victim. and that precluded them from being able to undertake the type of employment and the role that they were ultimately aiming to get to. It's really, really sad, but unfortunately it's a reality. So it could happen, and it depends on what field of work you do, what career you have, or what career you're wanting to have in the future. It may not be applicable to you, but it's definitely worth mentioning in case it is. So one of the other things that is extremely important to consider, or the legal considerations that need to be made, I am going to refer to my notes because I have a lot to say and I didn't want to miss anything or labour on a particular point. And then the first thing that I would say is, if you have reported the matter to the police, the matter has been prosecuted, and the outcome of the court case has been determined, obviously you then have a court record and you can speak freely. But there are circumstances where a court will restrict a person from identifying themselves as a victim by name and by identity. They may be able to do it as an anonymous person without showing their face. And the reason that the court might do things like this is because of the fact that there could be other victims that are identifiable through your disclosure. So say, for example, you're a CSA victim, as is your brother, and the court have prosecuted the perpetrator abuse towards yourself and sibling, then you go forward to the public and you identify yourself, and the court records clearly indicate that the victims in that particular court case was a brother and sister, or a sister and a sister, or a brother and a brother, siblings, then you inadvertently have identified your sibling, and that's a breach of their privacy, and the court will try and do everything they can to protect everybody's privacy. And so that's why sometimes they will make restrictions on that, and sometimes they don't make restrictions, but if victims are minors, they will be assigned A, B, C, or some other sort of pseudonym that the court knows who that person is, and they're identifiable, but they're not identifiable to the general public. So if you go forward and say, I'm A, and the court record shows, person A and sibling B, then it's, if you've only got one sibling, or you're identifying your sibling, or at best, I beg your pardon, you're identifying one of your siblings, and that then causes speculation as to who the other person is, etc. And it really, it can be extremely harmful to families, and it can also be very, very harmful to individuals. Even the person who does the disclosure, if they don't think about it as a consideration for whether or not they do want to disclose, and then they realize later that they've inadvertently identified somebody that they didn't want to identify, it can be really upsetting for that person also. And so, that's just something that is worth thinking about. The other thing to think about is the situation where you haven't reported to the police at all, or the matter hasn't been gone forward sufficiently to be prosecuted. So once a matter has been prosecuted, irrespective of the outcome, the matter cannot be retried again. So if you haven't tried the case, or it hasn't gone to a court, you may have made complaints in the past or notified police or whatever, but you may have intention or be in the process of, if you're in the process of commencing, or the prosecutor has commenced or is commencing criminal proceedings against an individual, do not talk about it publicly at all. I can guarantee you're going to have a strong conversation with the prosecutor, because they obviously don't want anything to be said or done that would jeopardize the case in any way, shape, or form. The other thing is that if you speak out, there is a presumption of privacy that you would have, and the court would protect. And however, if you go publicly and identify yourself, the court then cannot justify the protection that you would ordinarily be given through the court. So at least until all of the matter has been concluded, for your privacy and for the privacy of any other victims involved and the integrity of the case. Cases have been thrown out over things that have been said by victims in the public. Just avoid the whole drama and the headache, the heartache, if a case is thrown out. When you then go to court, obviously you'll have given a statement to the prosecutor. If the person that you're accusing doesn't plead guilty, if they plead not guilty and it goes to trial, you will very likely, most CSA cases, the victims are the principal source of evidence for a court case. So you would likely be called and you would then be cross-examined by the defendant's solicitor or attorney, depending which country you're in, and they will have done their homework and they will have seen what you have said in the public arena, and anything that you say that's not consistent with your statement or any other evidence that you have given will be picked at. And even if it's explainable, I was talking too much, I didn't talk to, I misunderstood the question, I said the wrong thing, or even if it's the most, small issue, you can be certain that a criminal defender is going to take absolutely every opportunity. And what that will then serve to do is to reduce your credibility as a witness, and then it can reduce the weight that either the judge or the jury, depending on who the finder of facts is in the case, they may not have sufficient grounds to find a person guilty. The burden of proof in a criminal proceeding is beyond a reasonable doubt. So if your evidence is not 100% clear and your evidence is deemed by the finder of fact, being a judge or the jury, depending on the circumstances, if your evidence is not found to be significantly credible by some technicality where you've said something that's varied from what you've said in the public, the weight given to your evidence can be diminished because you're not seen as a credible witness. And that's not to say that you aren't a credible witness, but that's the way the law works, and that can cause cases to fall over and not guilty verdicts to be issued. So it's horrible. It sounds awful. It's not great, but that's why it's really, really important that you think about whether or not you're going to a public interview or a disclosure or speak about it in the public domain, social media, anywhere, because if you do intend in the future, these things could come back to bite you in the bum, so to speak. The other issue about speaking out, whether you intend on prosecuting or going to make a criminal complaint or not, is the fact that if the perpetrator is still alive, then they have equal rights to everything as what you do. And then we run into the potential risk of defamation. First defense to defamation is fact and truth. So if you do make a statement about a perpetrator and it's factually true and that you can adequately demonstrate truth or belief of truth, then, there's nothing to worry about. It's not likely that something like that would happen, but it's something to think about. And if you are concerned about it, then seek independent legal advice as to whether or not you should. One of the other main factors that I think is worth considering before making a decision to go ahead and do a public disclosure, statement, interview, is where you're at mentally. Are you in a good place? Have you got a therapist? Do you have a support network that will allow you to have a safe place to go to, somebody professional to talk to, good family support structure, friends, all of those sorts of things that are consideration, because as I said, I'm not a CSA survivor or victim, and I don't know how it would feel, but I have had other circumstances in my life that have put me in the public domain, and until you're in the situation, you don't quite have a full understanding and appreciation for what you're walking into. And I would imagine that is probably also the case in respect of disclosure of CSA and other abusive practices that you may have experienced. And so all I can say is that I would highly recommend you think about where I am mentally. Am I in a good place? Have I got professional support in structure already that can support and guide you through the process. And is it the right time? Is now the right time? I don't think ever is exactly the right time. I think it's like having a child. Never is the right time. You're never fully prepared to have a child, and I guess you can never be fully prepared to speak about, such personal issues. But I would highly recommend that you at least, see a professional, see a psychologist, counselor, therapist. Hopefully you've already engaged with one and you have had some therapy and gone down that rabbit hole and really sorted out some of the serious issues. Talk to them about whether or not they think place where you are okay to talk about these things, and that they then are aware that you're going to do it, so that they can then support you in a way that you need to be supported. So that's something to think about also. So they're the key issues that I have, thought about and that need to be applied to your personal circumstances in making that decision. I have got a list of risks and benefits, which I know was the pros and the cons. So in the risks department, wanted to hit about the intrusions that can happen. So the spillover effects that it could have in your life. I talked about employment and those sorts of things, family, how they're reacting, friends, how they react, all of those things. But there could be just people who you don't have anything to do with in life, who may feel like they have a right to then further inquire into your life, when in actual fact they may not. So that's something to think about too. And I think particularly the medium that you choose, like if you chose to talk about on social media, that would bring out one set of issues. If you went publicly and did an interview, that would have another set of circumstances. I can't give you specific examples in relation to this, but if you know a victim of any abuse who has spoken out publicly and you are seriously considering it, it might be an idea to go and talk to them about their experience of where their public discussion has spilled over into their private life and how it impacted them. So the other thing is that if you speak about it, people do, let's be honest, people do run the risk of minimizing your experience. So, well, my experience was so much more than yours, and that can really, really affect and impact how you feel. And I think it's so dangerous to compare one person's circumstances to another person's circumstances, because no two individuals are the same. And in my travels, speaking to different CSA victims, some of the things that I know are like, for me, I sit there and think, like I do. And they just are so nonchalant about it, and it's just a matter of fact. And I never cease to be I think about these people often, because I think they're amazing. They're amazing people, and for the resilience that they have is incredible. And yet I've spoken to other victims whose circumstances are so different, and they've got a completely different perspective on life to the person who that I had spoke about previously. And so it's you can never ever compare two circumstances. So when you put your story out and when you talk about it, it's a good thing to prepare yourself that somebody may oversimplify your case or devalue your contribution or your disclosure. And again, that comes back to that, having that professional support to be able to walk you through that process and think about those things before you go ahead and do it. And again, it may make you say, I don't want to do that, and that's fine. But it also gives you the choice. And I think that's very important. So yeah, that's other than what I've already said, and those few bits and pieces, they're my sort of cons, disadvantages or the risks. The benefits or the pros that I can think of is the emotional and psychological reward from giving your side of the story. I think that telling your story is so valuable. It does help other people, and I temper that with what I said earlier about it's great to help other people, but you have to be able to help yourself first and put yourself first. That is the most important thing. And if you can, that actually could be so rewarding for you to feel like you've got your voice back and to feel like you're able to put it in a box, or able to step past it, or able to accept it, or and just remember, acceptance does not mean approval. So you may have to accept, or you may then come to the place where you can accept that what happened to you. That does not mean that you give it approval. Let me promise you that. So I just wanted to clarify that point. And you can get to that place. And for some people, that's the best thing that ever happened. But that may not be the best thing for everybody. And this is where I said, when at the beginning of my video, think about your goals. What are you wanting to achieve? And what do you want to achieve for yourself? It could be that you want to take back your power and your control. Fabulous. Like that, they're great things. And they may be, things that are really, really helpful. Again, tempering that with the other side of it. But I love hearing context stories because I just love hearing people speak. And being able to use their voice and take control and share with other people. But I also don't blame anybody if that's not for them, or not for them right now, or for them ever. It really comes down to what your goals are. Could be a fantastic thing for someone to do. And also, I think it's encouraging to the community. I'm not great at speaking about CSA. I find it very emotionally upsetting. And, and I always fear saying the wrong thing. I always fear inadvertently upsetting a victim / survivor because of the fact that I'm not an expert in CSA. But I think that the more people talk about something, the more understanding people gain, and the more people then can have conversations that do make changes. And I think that I'm a benefiter of conversations. I have learnt so much. So people talking out, it then creates a conversation. And the more we talk about something, the more comfortable it is, the more acceptable in society it is. And, I think that there is a lot of benefit to doing that. So we've come to the end. I have really, really enjoyed researching and thinking about the questions that were raised in terms of whether or not to tell your story. I hope that my suggestions have given you some food for thought. Knowledge is power. So the more knowledge you can get, the better. And I hope that I've been a source of knowledge to you today. And I wish you all very well. If you do choose to go ahead and tell your story, I certainly will be cheering you on in the background. And if you choose not to, I'll still be cheering for you, because it is a personal decision. And I think everybody must respect an individual's decision to make their own choices, what's best for them. And so this is my first video of 2023. I've absolutely loved being able to share my thoughts. If you have any further thoughts or ideas, I do have a few more that have been suggested that are great. But if you have some ideas, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a message on Twitter or in the comments below, and I will do my best. Okay, take it easy.